Welcome, listen. Oh. Hang on. All right. Welcome, listeners, to the second series of the story behind the sound. Happy New Year, and thank you for coming back. We are still making podcasts, I think, like probably everybody else at the moment who's in lockdown. So we do thank you for tuning in and listening to our stories. We're trying to add a little bit of professionalism to this, so you'll be delighted to hear that we now have a jingle. I'm not going to play it now, but more of that soon. So what's coming up tonight, or today, or this morning, whenever or wherever you are listening? A very special guest today, a former colleague, a prominent organic grocer, and a mean horn player. But more of that later again. He's going to help us guide us through a journey through the world of horn playing. So really, really excited about this episode. I'm a big fan of horn playing. So we're going to talk about it more. But before we talk about it more, I'm going to introduce my co-host. Legend has it that buried somewhere under the asphalt of the M32 coming into Bristol, he's buried some flat wound strings in homage to the Motown bass sound. But who knows? I'd like to introduce Alex Pearson, aka Mr. Non Wilkinson. How you doing, Alex?
Hello, yeah, I'm doing all right, thanks. It's good to be back for Series 2. We've made it.
Did you have a busy winter break?
I got married, in fact.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov, yeah. It was live streamed, and I'll put the link in the comments so you can all watch it.
Yeah, we all did watch the live stream as well, and I have to say, you and Non did a mean bass duet.
Oh, amazing!
Thank you. Yeah.
Who's that? Hark! Who's that sound I hear?
Yes, you may have heard a third voice there, and as you know, we like to sort of give our guests a little bit of a rolling introduction. And there's always a few sort of nicknames and pseudonyms in there. So today, our guest, sometimes known as the boss man of Alcatraz, sometimes known as the Dean Ashton of Caution, sometimes is known as the organic Lovejoy who doesn't deal in antiques. But to us, he will always be BJ69, or to the rest of you, Ben Mortimer.
Hi, thanks for having me on for the second album, as it were. I'm very, very pleased and humbled, and to be honest, I didn't have anything else on, so
Yeah.
I had 3 things like planned this week, all low key. 2 of them been cancelled, so they can't take podcasts away from us, can they?
No, not yet.
So, not yet. Let's tighten the lockdown further. No podcasts. Well, thanks for having me anyway.
It's good to have you here, Ben.
Yeah.
So, as you may have heard already, a great horn player, and you'll never say that yourself. But when did you start playing the saxophone? And is that the only horn you play, or have you been in any other horns, any horn sections? You know, when did your journey start with that instrument?
Wow. I remember I was playing in year 5 because they didn't teach it in my school, and I had to go somewhere else to get it, to get lessons. And that was, I played alto sax back then. Not quite sure. I can't really remember how I ended up playing it. I did have piano lessons before that, I think. Tried a few other things. And yeah, I loved music at school, and saxophone was my thing. I don't really like playing the alto anymore. In fact, I sold it, so I don't enjoy it half as much as tenor, which I sort of picked up in my teens. I think the kind of interesting bit of the story, which will link to one of the tracks I'm going to play, is sort of discovering what I liked to play, what I was good at, what I liked to hear, and how that was different to what was probably part of the core education and probably still is in secondaries and universities particularly now, which was jazz. So I did like all the kind of I did quite a good balance at secondary school of like all types of music. There was a good sort of culture of classical, pop, jazz, everything. I don't think the jazz sort of like repertoire was there for education at that time. So I did all the classical stuff up to the grades and things, but I was doing the jazz stuff in the ensembles and things at school, probably enjoying that more because, let's face it, classical saxophone is not really a thing. And then when I got to uni, everybody was playing jazz quite sophisticatedly, properly, improvising properly. And the core, even though there's a lot of kind of like funk and soul and, you know, all kinds of pop stuff with horns and things around as part of like kind of like fun stuff, you know, playing in bands and things, the core serious stuff horn wise was jazz. And I guess I've really never quite got it. Like, I love listening to jazz. I listen to it now. I love learning about it, teaching about it, but I've never really quite wanted to play the saxophone core jazz stuff, the bebop and the you know, all the improvising styles, all the modes and things. I kind of like it. I like it to listen to. I haven't ever really felt that it's my thing. So when I was at uni, I kind of discovered R&B, and not like rhythm and blues like now R&B, like 50s R&B, which I'll come on to later. And then, you know, playing in funk bands, soul bands and stuff, I kind of found like the thing I loved the most, even though I played a few other, dabble a bit in other instruments and things, as you know, like the core thing I absolutely love, which is why I'm excited to be talking about horns on this podcast, is that raucous tenor sax sound, not overly complicated, just the beauty of the graininess of that sound, and particularly when it's like as part of an ensemble, when it's in a arrangement of soul or funk or something. So that's kind of my thing. And you know, anything where the kind of improvising is not supposed to be overly complicated and overly thought out and technical, just felt amazing. So I suppose, like, as a musician, you probably as musicians you kind of see that kind of where you can use the blues over most of those styles, and where the blues is at the root of it. And when anything starts to move away from blues, that's where that's kind of something different to what I'm interested in. There we go.
That's amazing. That's really set up our episode completely. So I love the fact that, yeah, your entry point was I can't remember how you described it, just the rasping sound of the tenor in R&B, in original R&B. So I can't wait to hear your selections and hear you talk about it more. This is our horn special. I wrote out a big introduction to the track that I'm going to start with, but after that, I think I'm just going to play it and talk about it afterwards. So this is Maceo Parker with his version of Soul Power. This is Soul Power 74 to kick us off.
Lovely stuff. Brilliant choice there, Drew. What's the reason behind picking that one?
Apart from, I mean, as Ben was saying about just kind of the all-out rasping sound of the sax, and yeah, I'm not sure whether it's alto or tenor. I think Ben's pointing me in the direction of
it's alto. Yeah.
Okay, alto. So as Ben was saying, like the rasping sound anyway of the sax. I discovered this song during the days of busking, when I used to go out busking, and this was the first ever solo that I learned on the flute. I know the flute hasn't got as a rasping sound as the sax, but
it does, man. It does. I'm all for the flute.
Okay.
Look, let's just get this sorted now. Let's bring the flute into the horns. It's part of the family. We're in.
Thank you. Always second fiddle to the horn, or metal wind, as I like to say. Anyway, so I learned this one. This was the first solo that I learned just note for note on the flute because I just loved it. And as Ben, you were saying, it didn't have that. I don't know, that maybe complication of jazz. It was a simplified, a simplified solo, but it's not simple. I don't want to kind of categorize it as that. So I just loved the solo, and also, after playing it and discovering it, I realized that it's just been a really heavily sampled track. Just like anything from kind of the James Brown and JBs and era, that sample. In fact, I'm just going to play it to you now.
Go for it.
The sample was used by a band called Black Machine, and a track called How G, and it goes like this. I think you'll recognise it.
Nice.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Anyway, I won't play that all. I won't play all of
Sweet.
that. But so that's really the history of it. From my point of view, it was actually a cover of. It's got an interesting story, which I'll briefly tell. It's got a cover of the James Brown track called Soul Power, which was released in 1971. And if anyone wants to or knows it or wants to go and hear it, there's an 8-minute version on his 1986 album called In the Jungle Groove, which is worth getting anyway because it's got the funky drummer on that as well, which is kind of one of the most sampled ever drum tracks. So James Brown recorded the original, which has got James Brown and Bobby Bird singing on it, or kind of doing his kind of James Brown rap thing. But then 3 years later, James Brown got Maceo Parker to cover it with Fred Wesley, replacing the vocals with horn lines, and and they recorded over the original instrumental, and the producer at the time was he had to put in a kind of sound effects to cover up some of the bleed of the vocals as well. So this was it's a cover kind of orchestrated by James Brown, who he wanted those long instrumentals and kind of got Maceo and Fred Wesley to do that, and I think it's just a classic funk track, which is why I chose it. So Ben, do you know that track?
I do. I generally know the sound. I know the track not really, really well. I have to probably retrace my steps on hating on the alto earlier on, because if there is someone who knows how to play it in a way that I like, it's Maceo. That is, it's pretty sweet.
It's funny. I was reading a little bit about Maceo's history with the James Brown, and James Brown only really got Maceo Parker into his band originally because Maceo came as a double deal with his brother Melvin, who played the drums, and James Brown
like the
really
Neville brothers or something, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a double deal, and Maceo was just viewed as the kind of the lesser party in that. Melvin was the drummer that James Brown really wanted, but he said, "All right, if I'll take Maceo on anyway," and see how it panned out. And Macy obviously went on to play with Parliament and Funkadelic, and
Yeah.
and then do his own thing as well. So
Whenever I hear Maceo, I just hear the octave. Do you know, like at school when you learn intervals, whenever it's supposed to be like whatever you do for the octave, is that Somewhere Over the Rainbow? I think.
I don't know.
Oh, we're going back to school here. Somewhere. Yeah, that's the octave.
But
I
you had
always
a Maceo version of that.
Yeah, no, I'm going boom, woo, boom, woo. whatever that funky track is he does. It's like, yeah.
Anyway, we could do it. We could do a whole hour on James Brown and horns, but we're not.
Yeah.
We're only passing through there. But I thought it was a good place to start anyway. With if we're going to talk about horn sections, to be mentioning Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley, the JBs, and James Brown. So we move on, and let's talk to you, Ben, about your choices, and I'm going to leave it to you to introduce what you're going to play to us tonight.
Cool. I think the simplicity angle, and that's a bit of a theme so far, and I love that about funk. I love that you can just groove on a 1-bar thing for nearly ever, or there's like a little bridge for 2 bars and then you're back, and I sort of love that. And obviously it's a great basis for showing off an instrument, and in that case Maceo. And in the case of my first track, it's the tenor played by Big J McNeely, which is pretty obscure, but if you know that R&B like goes back, I'm always like telling people, R&B is not just like a 90s thing. It's rhythm and blues, and it's like the 50s, and it came out of jazz and big band and stuff. And there's like a small niche of that was called jump blues, and this is where Big J fits in. You probably know Louis Jordan, maybe Big Joe Turner, almost certainly Louis Prima, and that it sort of comes from that same kind of set. So yeah, Big J is a tenor player from Los Angeles, and this is kind of early 50s. It's pre-rock and roll. There's lots of discussions around its influence on rock and roll, but primarily like the early rhythm and blues stuff was kind of aimed at African American audience, and wasn't mainstream at all. So the band is take the big band, but then slim it down to a 5-6 piece. Again, like it's really similar to funk in its setup, although obviously decades apart. And the kind of most obvious and major kind of songs and tracks and artists it's got vocals in it, but there are instances in the case of Big J, for example, where it's instrumental. So his whole stuff is him on the tenor at the center, front and center, just like Maceo. So where a lot of these guys, they sort of, were the main sax player in a band, whether it was Big Joe's band or Louis' band or whatever. But yeah, as I say, it's a bit niche, but what it is like when I discovered it, when I was saying earlier about kind of discovering what I loved hearing and playing on the tenor, this is the sound that's like, I think I heard someone compare once the tenor saxophone and the cello to the range of it to the human voice, and whereas a violin maybe is like quite high and you got double bass too low, it's somewhere in that kind of range, particularly like the upper male range, it's like it's singing, but it's gravelly, and it's for me it's a bit like a soul singer in itself, the tenor. But this guy is like using it in ridiculous ways, like the high, like altissimo register, which, if you go and study it, is called extended techniques and all that stuff. But literally he's just trying to make ridiculous sounds on this instrument. And it's really fun. It's fun, and it's loose, and it's free, and it's sort of free of the perfections that the later sort of pop music styles tried to have or did have, and maybe it's a bit because it's off the grid a bit, if I can borrow that expression. I probably won't say much more other than I like the fact that he started out in his career with a lot of success and made these records and managed to find a studio to make the records for him. Then it didn't really go anywhere, and he became a postman for like ages. And then in the 90s, like ridiculously, there was, I think like 80s, 90s, a bit of an R&B revival, and he kind of found his career again. And there's a little bit of a link to my other choice as well. But I kind of like that. I love the idea that, you know, if you're not like a pop star and you've done it like 25, then you know, it's your career for life. It doesn't really matter whether you're 20 or 40 or 60 or, you know, Johnny Cash coming back in his later years and making his best music, in my opinion. And I love that too. So yeah, it's a kind of cool story. And I could have played any track, but this one is, it's the most ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I'm going to leave it like that to set it up. So this is The Goof by Big J McNeely from 1950 something.
I love that. I just loved the energy that was just coming off the record there.
Yeah.
Do you know, was that a live recording or was it?
I think so. It's hard. It's one of those one microphone job sort of days,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the cover of the record, the CD collection I've got is, you can imagine it's just like a guy, which I think is him, on his back with a tenor in the air with like everyone piling on him, you know.
Yeah.
And it's that, like when I play, I'm like, I want to get in the audience. It's that kind of, they can just imagine it like just decadence. I mean, it's like it falls apart nearly, right? I mean, it's got to be a live track. There's so many similarities to the Maceo, just like the the band arrangement and the group vocals. Like, you got to love the group vocals in there.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you was, so you've mentioned alto and tenor. So I've never played the saxophone, but I'm guessing alto is sort of higher in range than the tenor. And so the tenor is the one, that's a tenor on that track, you said, wasn't it?
Yeah, but there's a Barry in the section as well. I mean, So when he goes really high, that is like fortissimo, altissimo, but it is a tenor. Yeah,
because I heard him go high, and I was like, "Oh, blimey! Is that still tenor, or is it?" But clearly, it is.
I mean, he's. I mean, it's like on most instruments where you have harmonics. So you're basically playing a low note but overblowing, and then there's a few other little shapes on the, the hands to get this above the register. There's not a button for it. There's no key for it. It's just like technique.
So am I right in thinking that you couldn't play that track on an alto because you wouldn't be able to go low enough, or is it just certain players they'd feel more at home on a different instrument? There must be some crossover into
there is. I mean, almost. Every sax player plays all of them basically. Like if you're a gigging musician, you play them all.
Right.
Famous players stick to one as their kind of core thing. To be honest, I think Maceo, I'm sure there's listeners that will find other examples, but Maceo's probably is one of few that I can think of that sticks to the alto, whereas the tenor is outside of jazz, where you've got the kind of core kind of guys doing, Bird and things doing alto. I think in pop music, outside of jazz, funk, soul, everything, tenor is the slightly more go-to, because possibly that kind of range suits the arrangement more. But I mean, with doing all that crazy stuff at the top, you can get to the alto register. To be honest, it's a preference, I think, but it's definitely I think the tenor is more common.
Do you think it was like Maceo stuck to the alto because PB Ellis was on the tenor?
Yeah, I mean that's
maybe
the thing.
It's like, there's no point doing it if we got our roles at that time in that group.
In terms of like playing it, because that's kind of what your question was. I think where you can hear and bebop and stuff, and with Maceo, you can play faster on a alto, like you can play faster, easier on a violin than a cello, I think.
Right.
So because the instrument's smaller, you've got more dexterity, you can move quicker. So, but I think the thing that just doesn't sit well for me on the alto is that lower range, like you said, that core going into the so the lowest note on the tenor is sort of like middle of the bass clef, and you can't get down there on the alto. And I think that just sings. This is beautiful where it gets down there into here, like this kind of register.
Yeah.
So I think that might be something in that. But when you so basically those players were called the honkers and screamers, and the idea is like a bit like when you hear some like crazy cello Xanakis or something, where it's like extreme ends of the spectrum. It's how low can I get to like well. When you exactly it's a classic Courtney. He's the tenor, like he's the lowest B flat up to the crazy highest register you go. You hear that resonance where you hear bass, you just like touch something and you feel it. Like when you're playing the tenor and when you're close to it and listening to it, you hear, like the Barry as well, you hear that depth in that lower range where you don't get there on the alto. So I
love what you said before. Sorry to interrupt you, but I love what you said before when you're introducing just how you came to the sax, of the fact that you liked how it sounded like a male vocal, a soulful vocal, and like all the soulful greats, there's something about that frequency range. I think that your Otis Reddings and and Charles Bradley, who I think you talk about later, who any of those soul greats, Wilson Pickett, who have that sound in that frequency range, and that's something that I think you said that the tenor has as well, and I love that comparison. And
they're the instruments that do the solos, and the one I forgot is the guitar, because obviously the guitar has a great range and it goes a little bit lower than the tenor sax, actually a bit lower than tenor sax, but obviously it reaches the full height. If you think about the instruments again, like I know maybe the saxophone in recent decades has sort of lost its thing in pop a little bit, but classic pop styles, you have your solo, and your solo is guitar or piano or sax, which is normally tenor. You don't get like a random trumpet solo in pop music. I mean, sometimes, but there's something about that register. You think about that guitar solo, it rises out of the bass clef and sort of like comes across the bar, meeting the end of the vocal phrase into that solo. And maybe it's because of the vocal range-ness of those instruments, that they are the chosen solo instruments, the way they speak like a voice, maybe. And now I'm thinking there should be more cello solos and stuff. But, we can't rewrite pop history, and we could try.
I'm not sure you could start.
We're going to get cut from YouTube anyway
with a cello solo.
Someone's probably tried.
Okay, so that was an example of tenor saxophone. And what's the plan now, Drew?
Well, we're going to hear more from Ben.
Okay.
In just one moment, but I'd just like to take a moment and talk to you a little bit as well, because I did mention that we've now reached new levels of professionalism for the podcast, and we have a jingle.
Yes, we do have a jingle, which we're going to be premiering tonight.
I'd like to build it up a little bit.
Yeah, keep them waiting.
Okay, we might premiere it tonight. So we put the call out far and wide for a jingle, and a good friend of ours, Ross Miller, he said no, and then a few weeks later just emailed us a jingle. So we now have a very awesome jingle recorded and written by Ross, who's going to be our guest next week.
Guest next week, exactly.
Yeah.
So just a massive thank you to Ross. We're going to go back to Ben now. And you may be listening going, just play the jingle. But we're going to go to Ben now, and we're going to ask him to introduce his second track. But before we play your second track, Ben, we're going to premiere the jingle for The Story Behind the Sound by Ross Miller. So thank you very much. And Ben, back over to you. What have we got next?
Hang on, I'm confused. Are you playing the jingle or not?
Let's play the jingle.
I'm holding off from the calls from both of you to play the jingle.
The tech switchboard is going mental right now.
No, I know, but I'm holding tight here. It works. It works.
Okay,
please tell me there's horns in it.
After we've heard your stories, we're going to hear your story.
Okay.
And then
I see where you're going.
And
all right.
then we're going to play.
I agree. Yeah, let's hold off on the jingle. Sorry,
that's cool,
listeners.
I mean, we've put their minds at rest now, and I feel less pressured to carry on.
Sorry, Mum. Ben Mortimer, what's coming up next, Ben?
So I'm going to play a track that I'd chosen before you floated the idea of this being a horns thing, which I'm excited about. It gave me some focus, but I hung on to this track because it's a bit of a caveat, really. It's got horns in it, but if you'd kind of said that and I didn't have that track in mind, because I think you said to me first, play a track that you like, just whatever it is about it. Yeah. And I think when anyone thinks about that, something pops in your head straight away, and then you kind of mull over all the things you could choose, and it would be a disservice to my love of this guy not to play something. So there are horns in it. I'd like to talk about, if it's all right, like a couple of other things that are not horns, but
go for it.
If we think about the sound wave and the fact that all these things are like together, it's how they all work in I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so there's horns, but there's other stuff that's cool. So this is Changes by Charles Bradley, and it's a cover of Black Sabbath song, which I didn't know much about. I read that it was the bassist Geezer, whatever his name is. Geezer, that's his name anyway. He wrote the lyrics, and big Black Sabbath song, and covered by Charles Bradley on one of his sort of later albums, which is entitled Changes. And behind me here, there he is. If you don't know a little bit much about him, here's a little bit about him. He's unfortunately died a couple of years ago, and in the resurgence of his career. So he's from New York, and he spent most of his life trying, not trying, I mean, it's probably unfair, but, never quite getting the recognition. There we go. That's the best way of putting it. Getting out there, impersonating James Brown when he was younger, and you'll see the comparisons. And it was really like in his real later years, 60s, that he found recognition again and fame because of it, and that's how I got to hear him. I can't remember quite how, but you'll hear the voice and you'll just think, okay, I get it. His voice is just incredible. And in terms of the music, there's nothing really new about it. Perhaps production values, in that if you listen to James Brown and the Soul, James, Aretha Franklin, all of that stuff, but you want it translated into, if you ever think it's a bit raw, I sort of love the warmness and the vintageness of those sounds, but this is like with 20th century production value too, and the clarity in, I think for me it's probably not digital, but in the way it's recorded now, there's clarity in the arrangement, and so it's kind of like a long story short is it's funk and soul, but it's fairly recent.
Yeah. It's like the Dat Kings as well did,
same record label,
same sound, but right, okay,
same record label.
What's that? Is that what's that record label?
Daptone.
Right,
yeah, I think so. Yeah, hang on.
Yeah,
I'll check. That one isn't correct. There's some link or something anyway.
No, I think you're right. And just recorded really, really well. Like rather than the one mic in the middle in the 50s, you've got,
Yeah. So if you love the sound, you just really get to hear it. And his voice, I think that helps too. That it's the way it's recorded, the closeness of the microphone brings something, but also I kind of would like to say, to be fair to him too, that, and I'm going to get out there and say this, and you can tell me to get lost if you like, but if you line him up against Otis, against James Brown, against all those guys, I think he's still there for me. I think he's like the best. There's something in
the best.
Well, because of like how they're really young when you hear them recorded, right? So, and he's 60 in this, 70, and there's something different about it. I made that I made the point about Johnny Cash earlier, that his later records are different. They just, the depth, the gravity, the life, maturity, the brokenness in his voice, and it's all there. I'll say a bit more about it after, I think. So,
love that.
And the last thing I just wanted to say is I had tickets to go and see him, and
I remember.
Sadly he died before I got to see him, but a regret, but this is lush, I think.
You've heard the sound. Now here is the story behind the sound.
are filled with tears. Wish I could go back and change these years. I'm going through changes. I'm going through changes. Oh, it hurts so bad. In my life, it's gotta be a change. In my life, oh, these little changes in my life, it hurts so bad. Somebody gotta help.
Loved everything about that. It's my favourite thing we've played on this pod, I think, for a long time.
Even
But
after
there was no
Radiohead.
bird. There was no bird song on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean about the. It's like that sort of classic soul sound, but definitely with a modern approach to the recording. I mean, I don't know if any of our listeners are listening to on headphones. You might note that Charles Bradley's voice had a sort of echoey reverb on it, which was actually just the reverb tail of it was just in one on the right hand side of the headphones, which is quite a nice
That's
effect.
quite cool.
So you've got Charles's voice in the middle, and then his echo off to the right hand side.
A way of widening the vocal. one might
Exactly.
say.
Yeah. I think for me, what I like about the horns in that is how they're actually keeping it quite simple, but it's just the real like emotion you feel coming out of those horns, and that's how I really love it when horn players do that. They're just accompanying him, because they can go and do all this crazy stuff, but they can just sound really sweet. I noticed you highlighted me to the Barry sax in that. So what is a Barry sax, first of all?
So that's lower than the tenor. It's the bit with it's the one with the curly bit at the top.
Okay.
So it goes up to, they all kind of cross over. It's the same with voices. It's the same with strings, recorders, any instrument family. It's not one goes up to C and the other one goes from C up. They cross over quite a lot, really. They, good octave or so. It's funny you mentioned that, because I was really enjoying that in the track.
Yeah, I noticed you sort of pointed it out on screen, and you played me that track before, and every time I hear it now, I notice it. So Barry, that's short for baritone, is that right?
Barry's short for baritone. There is a bass lower than that. That's quite rare to see it, but they do exist. Barry, you can just about hang it over your neck, and it's interesting you pointed it out, and obviously I was enjoying it, and it's probably one of the main reasons I love this track, which is interesting to bring up now. I can't think of another time to bring it up where anyone actually bothered to listen to me. But I'm pretty sure I found the note earlier. I'm pretty sure it's the Barry low A. So on a saxophone, the lowest note is normally a B flat, but a Barry has a low A extra button, probably because of, I think, to do with concert pitch normally being in C, and so you get that low A below it, because the Barry's an E flat, the same as the alto. I'm getting a bit technical there, but basically it's quite common to have that low note, so they've added it to the Barry, and you get that ba ba ba, and it's just it sings, and they in the production of it and the EQing and stuff, they've brought that out there. But you heard it in the other track, and you heard it in the Maceo track. Like the Barry can feel a bit muddled up the top, and that's why it's not really often a solo instrument. But just for singing those bottom notes out,
That's where it's resonant, right?
That's where it's resonant. And I was going to, if it's all right, I was just going to say, in relation to the simplicity idea that you said, Alex, before. So you've got, in that track, you've got the tenor's always in the middle. That's really common, all the way back to early jazz. Tenor's in the middle, trumpet on the top, and the Barry on the bottom. In a bigger band, if you've got something like Chicago, Tower of Power or something, you've got 6 horns, obviously the whole range. But if you've just got 2, then you normally have trumpet, tenor. If you've got 3, trumpet, tenor, Barry, and the Barry's job is just to sing that bottom tonic, basically that lowest note. And they're playing in sort of 6/3 octaves and things. So you don't really hear them individually. You hear them as a unit. But you know, if you're the Barry player, you enjoy that note, right? That's just like,
I bet.
Disgusting. It's so you just sit there and you feel all the vibrations through the floor. And I don't know what it is, but I love that track. Probably 50% of the reason I love that track is that note, and it annoys all of my friends. I'm always like, it's now. I'm sort of.
Can I ask you
myself.
both a question? Because I think there's something that is quite interesting going on here. We're talking about the Barry from Ben's angle of that register. Then I'm also realizing that this is also your register, Alex.
Yeah, with a bass player.
Well, and and so I'm going to ask you, Ben, first, and then maybe Alex, we can talk about the bass in it as well, because the bass was really high in the mix in that as well, which I thought was interesting. But Ben, I know that you know a thing or two about arranging as well, and if you were writing these big Barry low notes, is there any ideas of how you'd place that to keep it separate from the bass part, which is kind of in the same register? Any thoughts on that?
My thoughts include the whole spectrum, and I want to bring another thing into it as well, and I will answer your question, which is you hear the organ fade in at the beginning, and at moments in the track, the organ and the Hammond organ, that beautiful Hammond organ with the vibrato and the Leslie speaker, blend with the horns together to the point where you sometimes can't tell the difference between them. Almost sounds like a choir singing. So you've got that in the register as well, and then you've got the bass. And I think the bass guitar will get another octave down on the Barry, so not quite sub bass, but it will kind of sing even lower. So that the Barry is that kind of low end of the guitar end. And I think probably in terms of arranging, you should think about when you're arranging the balance of the spread of the ranges of the instruments. And if you think about an orchestra, you've got 80 instruments that you're balancing the range of. Of course, some of you worked as a unit, and you need to let them all have their space and all let them sing. And so, again, I'm getting back to the answer, but when I hear those big bands, like when you go to Glastonbury and you see the big guys come on, like Brian Wilson or something, and he has like 40 people, and it's great, obviously, but I'm like, that's too complex. There's too many things. Like, that's why I love the funk. That's why I love that old blues record. That's why I love that Charles Bradley record. The fact that they've played together for ages, and they probably, I wrote this down earlier. I think I'd like to think that they spent like 5 minutes on that track because they knew each other so well. They've arranged so well. They know where their voice sits in the register. They know where the guitarist dips in for a little phrase on the end of the bar before the vocal kicks in again, and the horns hold off, and they all know their place. And I reckon they just walked in and they just did that. Like, it feels like that, doesn't it? A little bit. And it might not be true, but I'd like to think it is.
Yeah, it's the simple things that sometimes the hardest, because they need to, they know not when to play too much, and when playing little sounds better in the whole arrangement. In
the case of that drop, the bass and the Barry are playing the same thing, so it's absolutely fine. They're playing the same bass, the same root note, octave apart, beautiful. But what you can hear in the record, and it will be in the production as well, like I think one of you said, they bought the Barry out there. It's really prominent. I might have even said that. It's like I'm doing a podcast with myself. Anyway, one of us said that. But the
You
point
just carry
is,
on.
it's like
You carry on.
You've got three people who are responsible for how that sounds and how those things sit. And you got the musicians in the room. You got the guy that's arranging it or girl that's arranging it, which I think in that case, minimal. It's probably, you got the sax players, the horn players have kind of worked out what they're doing, but otherwise it's free. And they're working off each other. And then you've got the producer at the end who's deciding just to fade that organ in, bring that thing out a little bit, let those things sit together. And you have to be conscious of not throwing everything in the bottom end or throwing everything in the top end. But as producers and users of Logic and stuff, there's a lot you can do once it's all there to manage that space as well, so you don't end up with it too heavy.
Yeah, but as always, it's like you get the best sound to start with, and then do as little as possible afterwards.
Yeah,
which I think that's what happened on this album.
I think from the perspective of the bass, like in the, I think you're right. They've obviously played together quite a lot, and the bass. In the choruses which is the parts where the horns are really blasting it out, the bass actually goes quite high then, and I think that's probably a conscious decision. He's like, well, I'm not going to get a look in just playing the root note. So they're all trying to bring their bit of passion to that chorus.
Yeah.
So he's doing he's going up, jumping up to the octave, and really simple, but that also cuts through. And I think the more we talk about it, the more I think what a great job the mixing engineer has done with that track to make us be able to notice all these things, but make us also think, oh yeah, they probably just walked in and nailed it because they just know how to play with each other. But
The story behind the sound.
It's insanely professional. I'm digging it.
Okay, if you need any jingles, you can get in touch with Ross Miller, and I think we're having him on next week, so I'm sure there's loads more other music that we could discover from him as well. So thanks, Ben. It's just been great chat, and just listening to you talk about those choices that's just fascinating, so thank you very much.
That's right. Hope it's not been too academic, but can't help the way you think about music. There you are.
That's great. It's great. It's I've just enjoyed listening to the fact you love these tracks, and you love the sax playing in it and can talk about it for ages. And I've just enjoyed listening. So
it's an underrated instrument.
Dr. Parsons.
Yes.
That's. I'd like to come over to you. I think we should come over to you because in episodes previously, you've left us in some very different places with your final choices, whether you're reading some Kerouac or putting us out to the sound of the bird song of Victoria Park. But you're going to finish this pod with a song, and you're going to talk about it. So I'm left in wonder of what we're finishing in, but I'll leave it to you. Over to you.
All right. So I've gone a little bit more conventional this week. Did sort of consider my options there and sort of keeping my sort of flying the flag for Birdsong, but this is a horn special. So what I've gone with is I'm going to play some Dexy's Midnight Runners. A recent purchase, really. I've known about the album for a while, but I picked it up on vinyl recently. Their first album called Searching for the Young Soul Rebels. And it's obviously lots of people know Common Eileen and maybe Gino. Gino is in fact on this debut album. But what I like about this album is, to me, it sounds like a punk album, but they've got their mates who play horns in as well. And so I feel like it's got the punk energy, but also it's this sort of different angle of horns. And they did actually start out as a punk band under a different name, but they also had this love of kind of Northern soul. And so after a while of sort of being on the sort of fringes of the punk scene, they decided to go in a different direction, changed their name to Dexy's Midnight Runners, which I believe comes from when you had these Northern soul nights, you had certain dancers who would just dance all night, and possibly because they had taken some medicine to keep them going. And so they were called Midnight Runners. And I'm not sure about the Dexy part, but yeah, so they sort of went in this different direction and they started getting quite a name for themselves. And, primarily a live band. They hadn't done anything recorded wise. And eventually they were tapped up by Two Tone Records, which they actually turned down and went with a different label, which I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember who they were.
The Two Tone is that the ska label?
Yeah, because of their sound, you could argue that they could have fitted into the ska scene a little bit. But I think they were they kind of were going for a bit more of a mainstream label, to be honest. And they did release a single on another indie label, but eventually they did get a record deal with EMI. And so this album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, that's the record that they recorded, the debut album with EMI. What I quite like, a little anecdote about it, is they recorded the whole album and then realised they had quite a poor deal with EMI, and actually not even all of the band were on retainers or anything like that. So they sort of, as a band, thought we're going to improve our situation here, and they recorded the album. They waited for it to be mixed and everything, and then once the final mix was done, they actually nicked the tapes and ran off with them. Literally ran out the studio, went off on tour, a UK tour, and sort of held EMI to ransom a little bit, saying, "Well, if you want our," because they were already doing sold out gigs and touring around the UK, so EMI knew there was a market for this album. So they were able to get a better deal because of this.
Nice. Nice.
And the album then almost never existed at all, because once they finally agreed this deal, EMI, was like, well, we need those tapes back. And so they had these master tapes. They took them across London on the London Underground, which, because of the way the Underground works, it creates a magnetic field. And so potentially could have wiped everything on those tapes as well. But anyway, the tape survived. They released this album, and I'm going to play the first track on the album, which it's got two different names, so I just need to find an album sleeve to remember what this version is. So this version is called Burn It Down, and it's actually a re-recording of their debut single, which they released before they were signed to EMI. So that song used to be called Dance Dance, and rather than just put that version on the album, they re-recorded it. I prefer this version because it's a little bit higher tempo, just feels to have a bit more energy about it. And this, I think, is a really good example of how you can hear, particularly in the vocal delivery, that punk influence, but then you also hear that Dexy's sound.
Big Jimmy! Yeah! Yeah! For God's sake, burn it down. Ask you once more. You only want to believe.
I bloody love that
Yes.
It's good, isn't it?
You got the running order right.
Brilliant choice.
I forgot to mention, obviously, there's horns in that.
Yeah.
But I looked up their names because I was trying to work out what, after we'd been talking about different types of saxophone, I looked up who they are. So they got some good names, actually. So we've got, well, first of all, we've got Big Jim Patterson on trombone.
It's always big somebody.
Does that count? Trombone count as a horn? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And then we've got Steve Babyface Spooner on alto saxophone. And then finally, who I think needs to work a bit harder on his nickname, because he's just Jeffrey Jeff Blythe, and it just says saxophone.
Come on, Jeff.
He has got double Jeffrey in his name.
I know, but it's like, what's your nickname? Oh, probably go with Jeff.
Jeff.
To be honest.
Am I as resident doctor music or something here? Am I allowed to as in I'm taking?
Carry on.
I've definitely got the academic angle.
Do it.
No, I just want to clear up the horns thing because it's not clear enough. But in my understanding, in pop music, horns are...
It's led by the flute, yeah?
It's definitely not
right.
Led by the flute.
Go on.
Got it. Horns are anything that's made of metal.
But Ben, do you when you think about horns, you come from it from your perspective, what do you think about? I'm thinking the introduction to Try a Little Tenderness, when the horns come in with that melody. Exactly. You don't think about it should be anything to do. There are some classic horn sounds which involve trombones, tenor sax.
It's a colloquialism, for want of a better word. In classical music, horns are the French horns. That's just how we're taught about the families and things. When it comes to, because I think with students, I'm always challenged on this, but it's just a common term in pop, and pop is jazz and funk and soul and everything that's not classical. Horns is that section of musicians that stand together and play in homophony together, which is always got saxophones in it, trumpets, anything brass, rarely actually a horn, ironically. So it's the trumpet and the trombone and the sax is in the middle. And yes, Mr. Salida, sometimes there's flutes in there.
Sometimes they get a little...
Never a oboe, never a clarinet. No, but hang on. Apart from Lionel Hampton, some 1930s.
What about Benny? Benny Goodman.
Then. Benny, we'll let him in.
Okay,
let him in. But so I think horns. I always. I don't know. It's not just me. I've learned it. I guess that's the general term for metal.
I like that big metal group of instruments that were playing in homophony, who are making that big sound, that helping your harmony. But going back to Dexy Midnight Runners, the horn section at that, they weren't just giving a backing of homophony and homophonic moving together through the chords. They weren't just giving that. I felt like they were in conversation with the melody, the other melody instruments in that track.
Yeah, I think that's what I like about this album is it sounds like it's got that punk energy and kind of a bit of attitude, and even the horn parts are very, to me, they sound slightly different than what you might hear in a more of an R&B or funk track. It's kind of like these kids from Birmingham who, I play the saxophone, but we're gonna play this. We're gonna be in a punk band anyway, and we'll see what happens.
It's raw in the way it's arranged in terms of harmony. I noted down on my cue card.
Okay.
Cue cards. I noted down how the horns have been used quite differently in all the tracks we've listened to, and as a songwriting device, and I include that in a non-vocal pop track like Maceo, for example, like the device of a track, how you use different instruments, and you think your rhythm section, they're just all the way. You might have a break, but their job is just to hit that bass drum, play that bass guitar. You never get a break, Mr. Pearson, do you? In a gig,
no.
Unless they're like the guys like, oh, I'm going to do a solo, you can have a beer. Like, other than that, you just keep playing. But if if you're vocalist, you have to have a little break now and again. And what takes over is a solo or an intro or a little instrumental bit. And that's where the horns might come in. So like in the Big J and the Maceo, we've got full on sax solo all the way through. And then in the Charles Bradley track, we've got this complementary, beautiful kind of voices speaking in between the verses, overlapping the vocal, just underneath as well. And the same in the Dexies, you've got them sitting underneath the vocal at times, something simple. It's what Tom York from Radiohead used to call balloons, because it's like semi-breves or minims, just like literally just underneath, nothing too complicated. And then towards the end of the phrase, they just do something, and then in the Dexies, you've got their like the horn section, and everyone's like dancing. It's like, you know, they've got their moment, and the vocalist is having a beer or getting off with someone around the corner, or whatever. Like you need a break, not just like at the end of a phrase, but you need a section when it's a dance band, when you got something else going on, and it can't always be the guitarist with their foot on the on the monitor. Sorry, Mr. Salida there, but someone else gets a moment, right?
Shall we stop talking? Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and listening to you talk about music.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So that was episode 1, series 2 of The Story Behind the Sound, complete with brand new jingle from Ross and extra special guest Benjamin Mortimer, aka the boss man of Alcatraz. If you enjoyed what you heard, we have season 1 out there, 6 episodes and a Christmas special. You can find it all on our Twitter handle, which is TSBTS_podcast. Ben, thanks for coming on. It's been brilliant to have you and catch up with you. Drew, it's great to see you again after Christmas. And
The story behind the sound.